Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fill the Glass episode 11 on this day, April 11th. I have I put a little trick in the title slide for you today. I've got plans that I'm going to try to abbreviate Fill the Glass from 25 minutes down to 15, and we'll see if that makes it a little bit easier for more people to digest in the YouTube video world. Those of you who are live, I still intend to have the little green room pre-session chat that happens every time we hold one of these. So if you're interested, you're watching this on YouTube, this is a live event. If you hit this QR code here, you'll go to methodr.com. If you go to methodr.com/fill the glass with hyphens where the spaces would go, then you can see the schedule and you can join us live if you'd like to. But anyway, whether you're live or not live, welcome to the show. Today, I've decided to talk about something that I started working on a couple of days ago with the release of Oracle 23c Free. And that's this new trace-oriented package in the database called DBMS User Diag. DBMS User Diag looks like this if you describe it. So there's a procedure called check SQL trace event, which is kind of cool because it allows, or at least it presumably, and I'll get rid of the presumablys in a minute when I run these things, but it presumably will allow us to check whether my session is tracing or not. And you can see there's this interesting little SQL ID thing here. So there's a level, which is a binary integer output parameter. So this is how we learn what SQL trace event has been set. And then we can specify SQL ID. We can specify yes or no with a 0 or 1, whether we want to see for the entire system or not. The meat of the package is here in this enable SQL trace event procedure. So you can see, and I'll just kind of guide you through, what I saw when I first realized these things were out. I'm like, okay, so you can specify a level, it's an input parameter. But what happens if and presumably the level is going to be 1 for a standard Oracle 6 style SQL trace, 4 for standard database calls, level 6 style SQL trace plus the bind values. 8 would be, standard SQL trace plus the wait events, the OS calls. 12 would be a mixture of the binds and the waits. And then there's other bigger numbers that have to do with whether I want to have plan stat equal to first execution or all executions or adaptive or whatever. But then you start to notice that, okay, we've got a level and we've got binds and waits. Well, what if I say level 4 and then I say waits equals 1? How will that work? So there's a lot of experimenting because these aren't documented yet. And Martin was talking in the pre-show warm-up about a mutual friend who works at Oracle now. And Martin has an inquiry into him about whether it's intentionally not documented or if it's just something that's not done yet because 23C is not production yet. So there's some mysteries. What if I specify level and then binds and waits and they contradict? What if I specify level and plan stat? They contradict. Okay. We can also see a SID to serial number, which reminds me of DBMS monitor. So it looks like this package is not meant for just a user being able to turn on his or her own trace, but for a user who is permitted to turn on trace for somebody else, given a session ID and a serial number. So that's what these two parameter names kind of indicate in my mind. You can see here again, SQL ID, which isn't really new. We've been able to manipulate traces by SQL ID since 11G, I think. That's when a whole bunch of new Aura debug features came out, and you can access Aura debug by using alter system commands. So for decades, we've been able to say, I want to trace the SQL statement with this SQL ID. And a lot of people really like that, feel like it's a big deal. I've been less enthusiastic about it than most people because I realized that most of the time, the right scope for a trace is not just one SQL statement. And often when it is one SQL statement, I can just cut it and put it into SQL Plus or SQL CL or SQL Developer and run it with my own tracing command. But it is kind of cool. It's kind of cool to be able to say, yeah, you know what? Every time this particular statement runs, I want it traced until I can catch it misbehaving. So it looks like this is the package to enable you to do that without having to do alter system commands. Disable, I presume, and I've proven to myself this is actually what it does. If you set it to a positive integer value, then it turns tracing off. And then there's this interesting thing here that makes it look like I can turn on tracing for an entire system if I set sys to a non-zero value. So a few more things going on. Call error message, call status are two functions I haven't played with yet. Set exception mode, no idea. Don't know what it does yet. Set trace file identifier. Well, that's a cool idea. That means I can presumably set the trace file identifier to some value without having to have alter session, which is a big problem. I may not want a developer, for example, to have alter session, but I may not want a developer to have this because I probably don't want a developer able to do a system-wide trace or a trace of some other users. So it's an interesting hybrid between this looks like it's a DBA thing, not necessarily a developer thing, but it has things in it that would be helpful for a developer to have. And then there's a procedure called trace, which takes a message and an integer called alert. I expect this is probably a wrap of KSDWRT. I'm not sure, but I think it's probably KSDWRT. So let me pull my slide out of the way and show you a little bit of testing. So there are two scripts that I've written, and these aren't committed to GitHub yet, but they will be. So they're in my experiments directory in the dbms user diag directory. And again, you won't see this in GitHub yet, but you will eventually. I've got two scripts. Step one is what you've got to do with sys. And sys just simply drops user dev1 and recreates dev1. And the only privileges dev1 has the ability to log in, create a session, and run sys.dbms user diag. There's no alter session. There's nothing besides what you see here. Then the second step, the number 2 here in the list, is a script called to-dev1. So this is what I'm doing connected as dev1. And I basically just at this thing in the in SQL Developer. So what I've done, and let me go ahead and clear and make sure I'm not lying to you, is I'm going to run this. Doesn't matter if I run script or just run the SQL statement. And the thing runs. Okay, and we've got some errors and all sorts of stuff going on. So let's kind of unwrap what's going on here. All right, so first thing I do is connect and show user. So this user's dev1 is the show user that was on line 5. I'm going to move this over so I don't constantly obliterate what I'm trying to look at. So I set auto print on and define a variable called level that's a number because I'm going to need this with these output parameter procedures I'm going to look at here in a moment. So my first question I'm going to answer here on line 10 is, can I set trace file identifier without an alter session? So I'm running my script called my trace file, which you guys might remember comes in the GitHub repository in the SQL directory, and it just tells me the name of my trace file. So that's the output of that. So I've got a trace file called free_aura_23702. And then when I run dbms user diag.set trace file identifier with the argument of Cary, and then check my name of my trace file again, you can see that the procedure to do the set trace file identifier actually ran successfully. And you can actually see the word Cary in the trace file's base name. So set identifier actually ran without the dev1 user needing alter session, which surprised me, but surprised me nicely. So the next thing I've got here is line 15, 16 through 19. Can a non-privileged user start tracing? So on line 16, what I did is I ran my trace status, which is the script. I'm going to show you that one. My trace status does what it sounds like it would do, but it does it by querying $session. And I don't expect dev1 to have the ability to query $session. That's kind of a DBA thing. So indeed what happens is it says, I can't run your thing because I don't have the ability to look at $session. So, okay, that's fine. I've got this thing called check SQL trace event that dbms user diag gives me. So I guess we'll use that instead. So what I did on line 17 is I turned on trace with waits 1 and binds 1. And that ran here. And then I ran check SQL trace event, which populated the level variable. And since I have auto print turned on, we'll see what level got set to. And it in fact got set to 12, which is exactly what I would have expected. I've got waits true and binds true, and that's a level 12 trace. So cool. That's what I wanted. That's what I'd hoped for. And then again, I ran my trace status. And of course, we can't run it the second time for the same reason we couldn't run it the first time, because the table or view called $session does not exist in this user's world. The next thing I did was disable tracing, and I won't show you here because it's going to take too long for me to do it, but I did verify in some testing yesterday that the trace file actually does get created. I can select hello, don't have to say from dual anymore, and you can see the select hello right in the trace file, so everything's hunky-dory and copacetic. Turning trace off, I did with a disable equal to 1. And then when I've done that, you can see that the level becomes 0, which again is exactly what I would hope for. Now, a couple of interesting tests. What happens when level conflicts with, say, binds? So what I've done is I've set level equal to 12, which should be binds and waits. But then I set binds explicitly to 0. And I wondered, okay, what's it going to do? I'm telling it to do binds, and I'm telling it not to do binds. So is it going to do binds or not? And the answer is, which you can see here on this call from line 26, it does binds. So it took the level 12 seriously. It ignored the bind 0. Okay, I didn't know what was going to happen, so that's great. That's what happened. So I thought, all right, what happens if I set level 8 and then I want to add binds to it? So what I'm expecting is I'm going to get an 8, which is waits, but no binds. And then when I say binds, okay, it's going to add binds to the waits. But in fact, nope, it just does binds only. That's weird to me. So I presume the advice is probably going to be use level or use binds and waits in PlanStat, but not both. So if I were to wrapper this, I would probably say, okay, I'm going to give you the access to the binds and waits, but not the level, because nobody wants to have to remember that level 48 means PlanStat, adaptive, and binds true, waits true, whatever it is. So it's much easier, I think, to understand if you think in terms of the named arguments. Now, I've got a few more tests. If you want to shout out some either here or in our Slack technical channel, feel free to. But these are tests that I plan on running today after I get the video edited. So can a non-privileged user really start a system-wide trace with sys equals 1? And when I say non-privileged, I just mean, can somebody as simple as dev1, the way I've defined dev1 here, can somebody as simple as just having a grant execute on this package actually turn on a system-wide trace? And I'm cool with it if the answer is yes, but I'm probably going to wrap it. The second one here, can a dev1 type user really start a trace with session and serial number? And I expect the answer is yes, but I haven't tested it yet. And then can a non-privileged user get to PlanStat adaptive? I mentioned in the pre-show warm-up that we've had PlanStat equals adaptive capability with alter session commands for a long time, but DBMS monitor hasn't allowed us to get to it. So I'm wondering if DBMS user diag will, and I haven't tested it yet. So stay tuned. We'll probably talk about some of the results next week. And those of you who are in the Insider Only training course, probably talk about it again on Thursday as well. All right. Well, I promised you at the beginning that I was going to make the show a little bit shorter, and it's 10:45 right now. So for the show proper, I'm going to sign off right now. I'm going to pull over. I'm bad at missing out on this. If you're interested in any of this stuff, hit this QR code. We're methodr.com with a hyphen between the D and the R. And I'll hope to see you on a live Fill the Glass next week. So for those of you on YouTube, bye-bye. We'll see you next time. See you next week, same time, same place.